Hey there, my name is Terry with True Marie Soapworks, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the making of this batch. This is my attempt for the soap challenge this month. This month there was a guest teacher named Whitney Schneider of Cheeky Goat Soapery. This is her brand new technique called Groovy Swirls. If you're not familiar with the Soap Challenge Club, it's hosted by Amy Warden, and every month there's a different technique that's featured, and you get a video tutorial for the technique, and also it's a chance for you to up your soap making game. I highly encourage you to join. You can enter categories according to your own skill level, and beginners are welcome. There are different sponsors every month. This month it's Farmers Defense. Once in a while in this video, you'll get a little glimpse at the sleeves I'm wearing under my gloves that help protect my arms during soap making. Those are from Farmers Defense, and they are the ones sponsoring the prizes for this month. For Whitney of Cheeky Goat Soapery, for Amy of the Soap Challenge, and Farmers Defense, I've left links below. If you're not familiar with my videos, I like to give tips, so please stay tuned throughout this video. I will be letting you know what I learned along the way. Let's get started. To begin with, I make the lye solution. I start with 1/3 to 1/2 of the water weight that's required in distilled water ice cubes, and then I top off the remaining water weight with distilled water. Next, I measure the sodium hydroxide. If you don't know, sodium hydroxide is dangerous, so please, before you make soap, do all the research required and understand the proper safety precautions before you get started. Next, I measure the sodium lactate. I use sodium lactate in almost all my batches. I love it because it's a natural ingredient which helps the soap to last longer. It makes a harder bar, and it also releases from the mold much more cleanly. Next, I add the sodium hydroxide to the ice water, and I stir it until the sodium hydroxide is completely dissolved. Then I set it aside in an area that has good ventilation and is free from any kids or pets. Next, I measure the oils and butters that are hard at room temperature to get those started melting. For this batch, I'm using a combination of coconut oil, sustainable palm oil, and shea butter. Next, I microwave those ingredients very gently. I microwave them until they're just barely melted, but completely melted. In the meantime, I measure the oils that are liquid at room temperature. This includes the olive oil and the castor oil. For this technique, my batter needs to be a little bit thicker than my normal swirls that I do, so I'm able to use kaolin clay. I love using that whenever I can. I use it at a rate of 1 teaspoon per pound of oils. Since this technique requires your batter to be a little thicker, you can use a fragrance that causes slight acceleration, but just to be safe, I'm using a fragrance that does not accelerate. Then I add the fragrance to the liquid oils in the kaolin clay, and I set that aside. Next, I prepare the colorants, and I'm using titanium dioxide for the white. I'm using that at a rate of 1.25 teaspoons per pound of oils for 20% of my batter. And I'm using pre-dispersed titanium dioxide, and that is dispersed at a rate of 1 part titanium dioxide to 3 parts of olive oil. For this next color, I'm also using some dispersed titanium dioxide at a rate of 0.5 teaspoons per pound of oils, and then a pinky purple mica at a rate of 0.6 teaspoons per pound of oils to make a light kind of lavender pink color. And I'm using 20% of the batter again. In fact, for each one of these colors, I'm using 20% of the batter because I am dividing the batter 5 ways for these 5 colors. This mica is discontinued, but if you look for a mica that's kind of a pinkish purple and has the ingredients of titanium dioxide, mica, iron oxide, and manganese violet, you should be able to come pretty close. For the next colorant, we have New Leaf Mica from Nurture Soap. This is a gorgeous light green color, and I used it at a rate of 1.8 teaspoons per pound of oils. That's a little higher usage rate just because it's a lighter color. This color did not morph, as you will see later. Oftentimes green micas morph, and this one stayed true the whole time. For the next color, I'm using chromium oxide green, and I'm using that at a rate of 0.75 teaspoons per pound of oils. Chromium oxide green is a pigment, and you can find that at any good soap supplier that carries colorants. I also use a little bit of ultramarine blue just to kind of bring this green a little cooler. And I'm using a rate of 0.25 teaspoons per pound of oils. This would be a good time to tell you about my new colorant calculator on my website. For those of you that used to use Elements Bath & Body's colorant calculator, it no longer exists, and so I made this one on my website. And all you have to do is put in the ounces of oils that you are using, and then the percentage of batter that you will be coloring and the usage rate you're using. And it will give you the amount in teaspoons of colorant that you need to use. And also, if you pre-dispersed it 1 to 3, it'll give you that amount in teaspoons and in tablespoons. So check the description, I have a link for that. For the last colorant, I'm using Ultramarine Blue, and I'm using it at a rate of 0.75 teaspoons per pound of oils. And I'm also using a tiny bit of the dispersed green just to kind of make it so it's not quite so much of a royal blue. It ends up dulling it down a little or bringing it more towards the green color. I barely added any, so it really didn't affect the color much at all. Now that the colors are mixed, I use the stick blender and blend the clay into the oils to make sure it's incorporated well. Then I add that mixture to the melted hard oils. Next I add the sodium lactate to the cooled lye solution, and then I carefully add that to the melted oils. Now it's time to figure out how much batter is in the bowl so I can split it evenly. To do this, I weigh the bowl and the contents, and then I subtract the weight of the bowl that I recorded earlier. That gives me the batter weight, and then I just take that number and divide it by 5 or multiply it by 0.2 to get my 20%. Now that I have all that figured out, I go ahead and stick blend the batter. I want to take it really slow. What you don't see here is I stir and then I stick blend, and then I wait and I stir and I stick blend. I just want to make sure that I don't go past the point of no return. This technique requires a medium trace, but here I'm only taking the batter to a light trace. That way I have time to split the batter and color it. And also I'm using a new fragrance that I haven't tried before. Even though it says it doesn't accelerate, that's not always the case, so I'm just allowing a little extra time for that. Once I have divided the batter 5 ways, I go ahead and add the colorants and stir them in well. And then I'm just waiting on the batter. I'm going to only hand stir after this point, and I'm waiting on the batter to get to a medium trace. This design depends a lot on the colors and the placement of the colors because there's no swirls or anything. Basically, the design is just your blocks of colors and how they flow. When I pour the colors, I want to be considerate of the colors that have a similar tone. In art, tone is the lightness or darkness of a color, so let's change this to black and white. You can see that the dark green and the blue are very similar in tone. Also, the pink and the light green are very similar in tone. That just tells me that I want to avoid pouring those colors that are similar in tone next to each other if at all possible. That way the colors will pop a little more and you can see the definite line in between the colors. An easy way of doing that without changing it to black and white is just to squint at your colors, and you can often pick out the colors that are similar in tone. Another way is to turn the light off in the room. That helps you to just read the tones of the colors rather than the colors themselves. Let's talk about what makes a groovy swirl. This design is done by pouring thick random bands of color with crisp lines in between swooping colors. This can be achieved by pouring wall pours along the length of the mold or by pouring concentric circles around the edge of the mold. A tall and skinny mold works best for this design because we are looking for chunks of color. When using a regular loaf mold, the swoops have further to travel and therefore they get more spread out, causing thinner bands of color. In this design, we are looking for thick bands of color to cause a more dynamic design. Right here, I want you to notice the 2 colors that I mentioned not to pour together. I accidentally poured the light green and the light pink together, and I will show you later how that turned out. To make a successful groovy swirl design, I believe that using the concentric circle option works better than the wall pour option. I like that option because you are able to pour it in one spot. That focuses the energy down instead of pushing outward or across the mold. Naturally, your design will spread out, but you want these swoops to be deep and wide, not just wide. Having said that though, you want to make sure that your color doesn't break through the next layer. You just want it to push the next layer or dent the next layer. You don't want your colors to mix. This design centers around crisp lines in between colors. Once I'm done pouring the batter, I let it sit on the counter until it loses its shine. During that time, I spray it with 99% isopropyl alcohol a few times, and when it's lost its shine, I go ahead and oven process it. In order to oven process, I preheat the oven to the lowest temperature, but I only preheat it for around a minute. Then I turn the oven off and I cover my soap loosely and put it in the oven and turn on the oven light. Then before bed, I turn off the oven light and let it come to room temperature naturally. In the morning, I take it out of the oven and see if it wants to release from the mold. If it releases easily, I cut it that day. If it doesn't, or if it's extremely humid, I usually wait another day to cut it. In this case, since the trace was a little thicker, also that helps to be able to cut it the next day. So in this case, I cut it on the next day. Off screen, I used the horizontal feature of this cutting station and sliced a little off the top. Then I beveled the long edges, and now I'm ready to cut vertically. If you're interested in more information about this cutting station, it's from Custom Craft Tools, and I have a video where I did a review on it, and I also have some discount codes for you. If you're interested, check the description below. When we were talking about tone before, notice in this bar, the tone of the green and pink are very similar and they don't stand out. That line in between them is not defined. It doesn't pop. Now I realize in the first two bars, I also have light green and pink together, and that doesn't bother me. I think the reason why is because there's a big area of green and a small area of pink, and therefore you notice the difference in between them. The last few bars really don't qualify it as a groovy swirl because the swoops don't visibly come in from both sides. I can't remember how I poured it. It could have been some from the end and some from the side, but they still visually read as coming in from the same side, so they didn't really qualify. I still love how they came out though. Another tip that I have for you is when making your pours from the sides, it's best when the outer color of the concentric pour reaches or almost reaches the opposite side of the mold. That carries the eye back and forth and it makes the design interesting. When the pours only go halfway across the mold, the swoops look stacked and the stacks look separate from each other. We want the swoops to interact with each other. It just makes the design a lot more powerful. Another tip that I have for you is to make some extra batter. Normally for this 8-bar mold, I make a certain amount, but I made enough for a 10-bar mold, so 2 bars worth of a little extra so I can have enough of whatever color I need at the end. Thank you so much for sticking it out to the end. I hope you learned something today, and if you would like to see more videos like that, please give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. And if you're interested in joining my soap making group, I have a group called True Marie Soapworks, and you just have to answer a few questions to get in, and it's an excellent place for you to learn and share and grow as a soap maker. Also, please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can catch my next video, and check out the description for the links I mentioned and more information. And have a great day.